My name is Rachel Thompson. I'm 38. If you'd met me 3 years ago at Lily's first birthday, you'd have thought we had the whole thing figured out. A life that looked like a comforter, familiar patterns, carefully folded. I was a steady presence. Daycare drop-offs, bedtime stories, the little rituals that make a tiny person feel like the center of something. Victor, Lily's other parent, and I had dated years ago, and even after we parted, we stitched together a fragile form of co-parenting. We weren't married, we weren't dramatic, we were practical. He worked long hours, loved a certain kind of expensive coffee, and had a way of talking in calm motives that made people trust him. We didn't set up a formal custody agreement the day Lily was born. We promised the grown-up thing. We'll figure it out later. We're together anyway in all the ways that matter. That promise felt enough then. We built a life around it. Toys, holidays, a crib that someone gave us, an extra toothbrush in the bathroom. On paper, nothing ever looked wrong. 2 months before everything unraveled, a pattern had gotten hard to ignore. Weekends that once belonged to me evaporated into convenient colds, surprise family plans, or, later, the arrival of Brianna, Victor's new girlfriend who had a laugh like a soundtrack and a watch that always gleamed. Lily's 2 sick weekends were now punctuated by new dinners and unexpected out-of-town trips. One afternoon, after a particularly quiet month where I'd seen Lily once, I told Victor we needed to make things official. Legal paperwork for custody, formal visitation. I was tired of being negotiable. He blinked like I'd asked to measure the ocean. "You don't have to be dramatic, Rach," he said, and for a second his face softened into that old practiced charm. "We've always had an arrangement." "An arrangement that gives me phone calls and guilt," I said. "I want legal recognition." He shrugged, the casual move of someone used to reframing responsibilities as inconveniences. "You're Lily's mother. We signed everything at the hospital. They file it. There's no rush. I just want what's best for her." That shrug lodged in my chest. Something pricked me. The tiny, stubborn voice that, for months, I'd buried beneath naps and PTA emails. "Show me the birth certificate," I said. The question should have been normal. He went white and then angry. "What are you on about? We did that. You were there. We both signed." I drove straight to the state office that afternoon. The clerk's half-smile dissolved when I told her I wanted a copy of Lily Thompson's birth certificate. "Name of mother?" she asked. I said mine. "Mother not listed," she said, and the words felt like a physical shove. "Father listed as Victor Cole, mother unknown." 3 years of being Lily's mother, and legally I was a blank line. I don't remember the drive home clearly. I remember the smell of the highway and the way a song on the radio lost shape. I remember my hands on the steering wheel, some blunt, animal pressure building behind my ribs. I thought, how could that be? What I remember more vividly is the picture of the nurse at the hospital handing me a stack of papers. The acknowledgement form, the polite smile, us both signing. A small, necessary step that, in another life, someone would keep. The next few hours were a blur of urgency. I called a family lawyer, someone with the practiced patience of people who spend days in courthouses smelling like coffee and paper, and got an appointment for the next morning. I made a list of small, important things: receipts, texts, the names of witnesses. I remembered Janet, Victor's sister, who'd been there the night Lily was born and who used to take photos of everything. I called Janet, my voice steadier than I felt. "Do you have pictures from the hospital?" I asked. Her silence on the other end felt like a bell. "Yeah," she said slowly. "A lot. Why?" I explained the birth certificate. She said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Come over. Don't tell Victor." Janet's apartment smelled like coffee and crayons. She led me to her laptop and opened a folder labeled Lily Birth. There were hundreds of images, the tired, holy kind of shots that people keep for a lifetime. And there it was, a crisp photo of a form, the header clear as daylight. Acknowledgement of parentage, with 2 signatures at the bottom. Victor's signature was there, and on the line next to it, my handwriting, my name, our daughter's name, and a date. There was another photo. Janet had been standing in the living room, camera angled, and there I was, smiling and holding a paper up like a keepsake. The very form, token proud domesticity. The timestamp on the file was a week after Lily was born. Janet told me she'd thought it would be cute in the baby book. She'd kept it on a shelf for months. I felt all at once both vindicated and hollow. Someone else had the proof. Someone else had the evidence that contradicted the neat story I'd been told. I wanted to laugh and cry in the same motion. The next day, I sat across from Ms. Valdez, my lawyer, and unfolded the mess of receipts and photos like a map. She listened, methodical. "We file an emergency petition to establish parentage and ask for temporary visitation while we sort the paperwork," she said. "We'll need any documentation you have, bank records, texts showing you cared for Lily, Janet's photos, and if Victor resists, we prepare for a hearing. Be ready." Court felt strange and sharp when it came. We filed the motion. Victor was served at his office, a tidy, clinical practice where the staff knew his name, and the receptionist looked genuinely incensed to hand him a legal envelope. He called me in a scream, furious and theatrical in a way that smelled of earlier charm turned brittle. "You embarrassed me at work," he shouted. "How could you serve me? You don't get to ruin me in front of everyone." But politics in life and law rarely line up with personal outrage. We had photos, we had witnesses, and we had, quietly, the truth filed in an official folder that could not be erased by a flurry of words. Still, before the first hearing even started, Victor set the stage. He railed about harassment, filed a reciprocal petition claiming I'd been showing up uninvited, and painted a portrait he hoped would make me look unstable and controlling. He claimed I'd been texting relentlessly, bothering both him and Lily. His rhetoric had a strategy: to recast devotion as obsession. Sitting in the waiting room in my sensible dress, I watched parents come and go, toddlers clutching snack cups, and tried to translate my fear into something strategic. Documents were one thing, reputation was another. I tightened my fingers around my phone and opened the folder of photos Janet had given me. For the first time in months, I felt the raw edge ease a little. The certainty of paper was steadier than the rumor of charm. When the judge called our case, I rose with my papers and a belly full of small, human fear. Lily was 3. She should have been at preschool or on the floor with blocks. Instead, she was a quiet, bewildered observer in the hallway with a caregiver. I walked into the courtroom with my head high enough to meet the eyes of people who'd watched me change diapers and bring soup during fevers. The community that doesn't read press releases just shows up. The initial exchange was clinical. Victor's lawyer tried to paint me as a litigious interloper. I gave my account calmly. The birth certificate discovery, the photos, Janet's testimony. When my lawyer handed in the hospital photos, the clerk's scanner whirred like a small machine of justice. I watched Victor's face go from indignant to pale. That first hearing ended with the judge saying she needed more time, but not before denying Victor's motion for an emergency restraining order. The text he had used as supposed harassment read, in context, like a father trying to arrange custody, not a stalker. The judge's eyes lingered on the photos, and for the first time that week, something like relief washed through me. There was, finally, a record. As we left the courtroom, Janet squeezed my hand and said quietly, "You did the right thing." Holding Lily close in the lunchroom later, watching the way she settled into my shoulder, I understood how small victories could feel like lifeboats. I had the picture evidence. I had a lawyer. I had the start of the thing that would make my name official where it mattered. But a darker current ran underneath the relief. Victor wasn't finished. There was the sense that when cornered, people reveal the parts of themselves they usually hide. I watched him in the hall, his jaw set, his mouth a thin line, the way someone prepares a performance for a public, the unspoken danger of a narrative being rewritten in front of witnesses. I held Lily's hand as we walked out into the sunlight, and for the first time in days, I allowed myself to feel a very simple thing: determination. It wasn't just legal paperwork I wanted recognition, proof that the nights, the bottles, the first words belonged to me as much as any signature could prove. And I promised myself, then and there, that I would not let someone else decide my daughter's legal story. They served Victor at work, a glossy practice where the waiting room smelled faintly of antiseptic and success. The receptionist handed him the envelope with a small professional pity. He ripped it open like a man who'd been blindsided. His first call to me was a theater piece, rage wrapped in poise. "How dare you serve me at work?" he hissed. "You humiliated me in front of everyone." He spoke the language of injured dignity because he knew how persuasive that voice could be. He watched the narrative fold itself into a script that favored him. Wounded, abandoned, the man who'd been wronged by a vengeful ex. It was almost artful until it wasn't. He filed a countermotion, trying to flip the table, accused me of harassment, claimed I'd been showing up uninvited, texting until he felt threatened. He wanted a restraining order, a piece of paper that would paint me as unstable. The first hearing was small and bright like a stage before the curtain rises. I sat with Janet in a courthouse hallway that felt designed to be neutral and merciless at once. My palms were damp against the folder with the photos. We'd printed everything Janet had, the hospital shots, the form with our signatures, that odd snapshot of me holding the paper like it was a keepsake in Victor's living room. Janet watched my face with the pity of someone who'd seen the second act coming. Victor's lawyer, a young man with practiced outrage, tried to perform the old trick, confuse zeal for obsession. He held up screenshots of texts, leaned forward, and recited them like proof. To someone who didn't know the backstory, my messages might look nagging, but context is a cruelty in the wrong hands. The judge read the texts and then looked at me, patiently, like someone trying to reconcile two versions of the same weather report. When we presented Janet's photographs, the room slowed, the scanner hummed, the clerk's fingers were steady. One image, zoomed into the header, was a small bomb. The acknowledgement of parentage. The printed title clear as day, our signatures beneath it, dated within the week of Lily's birth. There was another photo of the same document propped on a shelf in Victor's home, the timestamp stubborn against his story. The judge's brow tightened. "Ms. Cole," she said, a tiny mirror of formality. "Is this your signature?" My throat tightened, but I nodded. It felt ridiculous that something so integral had to be proved with pixels. Victor's face went a color I recognize now as the color of exposure. His lawyer sputtered about plausibility. It wasn't enough. The law wants documents, not the theater of human motives. Victor tried another move. He produced a passport application for Lily dated 6 months earlier. The father line? Blank. But in small, cramped handwriting on the authorization field, someone had signed what looked like both parents' signatures. The clerk passed it to the judge. The judge held it like a relic, and the courtroom breathed as if a wind had blown through. Mrs. Keating, the lawyer Victor hired after the first hearing, a woman with a reputation that made other parents lean in, rose like a storm. She was precise, clinical. "Your Honor," she said, "my client maintains these are irregularities, but not proof of wrongdoing by Ms. Thompson. The existence of a photograph does not equate to filing with vital records." Her gaze was a scalpel. She was trying to excise the narrative before it infected the room. That was when Janet came forward under oath. She described the night in the hospital, the nurse handing the forms, the way she'd taken pictures because people forget things when they're exhausted and happy. She produced the phone and scrolled, slow and deliberate. The timestamp told the story the official offices tried to erase. The judge's voice went firmer. "Ms. Cole, are you alleging the respondent destroyed or concealed official documentation?" There was a weight to that phrasing, concealment, that made the air taste metallic. Victor's protestations sounded smaller under it. He tried to pivot. "I just wanted to protect my family," he cried. His new partner, Brianna, sat in the gallery with a face that had a practiced sympathy. She reached for his hand, and he balked as if surprised by the intimacy of witness. As the hearing stretched, more paper arrived like inconvenient weather. A benefits application from Victor's employer named Brianna as the child's dependent, a detail that read like a betrayal tucked into bureaucracy. The judge looked at the signature in the insurance file and then at Victor. "Mr. Cole," she asked, "did you list yourself or someone else as the father for insurance purposes?" Victor's answer trembled between convenience and panic. "We were trying to expedite coverage," he said. "Brianna helped." It was not an answer that sounded truthful to a judge who had spent years seeing how a small lie begins an avalanche. Mrs. Keating argued fervently about motives and framing, but the evidence kept dropping into the room like nails. When the judge announced that she would not grant the emergency restraining order and that she required further investigation into the discrepancies, including possible false statements on official documents, the courtroom dissolved into a hum of shock and anger. Victor's face hardened. He whispered to Mrs. Keating, a quick consultation. Her hand patted his arm like a nurse binding a sprain. Outside, as the courthouse doors caught the bright day, a strange silence held. People drifted away, muttering. Some friends reached for their phones with messages that felt like moral accounting. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. How are you?" There were also notes from people who'd already decided, public opinion being a fickle jury. That night, standing in Lily's small room with the moonlight pooling on the carpet, I felt the relief that comes with small victories and the hollow that follows. The court had not yet fixed what needed fixing. It had only recognized that something was wrong. Victor could still fight. He could still spin his story into sympathy. He had a new weapon now, the language of victimhood. And yet, the paternity test we requested, the quiet, indisputable mathematics of DNA, arrived like a verdict written by the universe, 99.9%. The number glowed on the page, blunt and merciless. The lab report was the kind of document that made you feel both justified and small. The truth had a way of being cruel in its clarity. When the test results sank into the system, Victor's strategy shifted into high gear. Mrs. Keating, whose reputation had been crafted in the crucible of family court, filed motions that read like a war plan, claims of abandonment based on his assertion that I hadn't filed paperwork, challenges to my fitness because I had not secured legal recognition earlier, arguments about inappropriate living situations. He fought the facts with language meant to erode them. The next hearing was colder. Mrs. Keating paraded affidavits meant to suggest instability, selective quotes from friends, notes about lateness, a painting of a life in strokes meant to emphasize flaws. She was relentless. And yet, under the accumulation of official records, the photos, the bank deposits for Lily's toys, the daycare receipts showing I'd been the primary caregiver, the case weighed in my favor. When the judge finally issued a temporary custody order awarding me immediate custody and ordering supervised visitation for Victor pending psychological evaluation, something inside me loosened. It wasn't victory so much as the settling of a long storm cloud. The judge's parting words, spoken with that courthouse gravity, hinted at consequences beyond this room. I am referring this matter to the district attorney for possible investigation into forged or falsified documents. Victor reacted like someone who had been cut from the stage mid-performance. He attacked and raged and promised appeal. He stormed out and then returned to the gallery like an actor seeking the audience's sympathy. But when Lily ran into my arms in the hallway, unself-conscious, trusting, that was the moment that mattered. She called me Mama, as if no court could ever change that fact. Back at my apartment that night, Lily asleep with a stuffy dinosaur tucked in her arms, I sat at the kitchen table and watched the city lights smear into a watercolor. I felt that odd double credit of justice and sorrow. He had been unmasked, but the cost had been a child's confusion and the pulverizing of a life that could have been steadier if we'd done the paperwork months ago. I made a promise to myself when I filed the corrected certificate the next morning in the bright bureaucratic office. Never again would I let someone's charm or convenience determine my legal reality. The law is messy and slow, but it remembers paper. And for Lily, for the small person whose world should be steady, I would let paper do the rest. The weeks after the ruling felt like walking through fog with sharp edges. Victor's silence wasn't peace, it was plotting. He withdrew from calls, from visits, even from Lily's daycare payments. But then, like clockwork, stories began to surface. Parents at the daycare whispered that I'd alienated him. A colleague mentioned overhearing someone say I'd faked documents. Even one of Victor's old clients, a woman who barely knew me, sent a message. "I don't know what's true, but I hope your daughter's okay." That's when I realized it. He hadn't stopped fighting. He'd just changed weapons. Brianna, his new partner, began posting cryptic captions on social media. Truth always finds its way through lies. Some people weaponize motherhood. Each post had a photo of her with Lily, from Victor's supervised visits, smiling like everything was perfect. The comments were worse. "She looks so much happier with you two." That child finally has stability. I didn't reply. I didn't post. But the silence made me look guilty. One morning, Janet arrived at my apartment with a box of files and a face that said she'd aged 10 years overnight. "He's appealing," she said, setting the papers down. "Claiming procedural error. Says the photos you provided were tampered with. I laughed, sharp and hollow. He's really going to burn down the truth if he can't control it. Janet rubbed her temples. He's losing control, Clara. That's when men like him get dangerous. She was right. That evening, someone keyed my car. Not random, deliberate. The word liar carved deep into the paint. I filed a report. The officer asked, "Any idea who might have done this?" I stared at him for a long second before answering, "Yes, but he'll have an alibi." 2 nights later, Brianna called me. Her number lit up my phone like a flare. When I answered, her voice was trembling. "Clara, I shouldn't be calling, but you need to know. He's not sleeping. He's drinking. He keeps talking about how you ruined him." "Brianna?" She cut me off, whispering fast. "He told me about the passport form, about forging your name. He said it was the only way to save Lily from your instability. Clara, he really believes it." My heart thudded. "Will you testify to that?" A pause, then a shaky, terrified whisper. I can't. You don't know what he's like when he's cornered." Then she hung up. The appeal hearing came faster than I'd prepared for. This time, Victor looked different. Gaunt, sleepless, but still burning with that dangerous moral fury. He spoke for himself now, claiming he couldn't afford Mrs. Keating anymore. The courtroom was quieter this time. Fewer spectators, fewer whispers. Just a man fighting a losing war with pride. "I made mistakes," he said, voice cracking just enough to sound rehearsed. "But I love that child. Everything I did was to protect her." The judge listened, then turned to me. "Ms. Cole, do you wish to respond?" I stood. My palms didn't shake this time. "Your Honor," I said, "protection doesn't mean rewriting history. It doesn't mean erasing a mother from her child's life. It means facing consequences and teaching your child that truth matters." For the first time, Victor didn't look angry. He looked tired, like he'd finally seen the version of himself everyone else had been seeing for months. The appeal was denied. Custody remained with me. The investigation into document falsification proceeded quietly, but I stopped tracking it. I'd spent enough of my life orbiting his chaos. Weeks later, I received a text from an unknown number. "You won. Don't think that makes you right." I deleted it without replying. But the strangest part came after. The silence. No more hearings. No more letters. Just an eerie stillness that made every shadow feel like it was waiting. Then, one rainy morning, Janet called again. "Clara, you should sit down." Her voice broke. "Victor's been in an accident. Single car. He's in critical condition." For a long time, I said nothing. I just stared out the window, rain streaking the glass, like the world was trying to blur itself. That night, I found myself outside the hospital. I didn't go in. Not yet. From the parking lot, I could see his window, dimly lit, machines blinking like stubborn hope. I thought of Lily's laughter, her questions, the way she once asked, "Why does Daddy look angry in pictures?" I thought of how easy it would have been to let him win, not in court, but in spirit, by letting him take my peace, my dignity, my softness. So I stood there in the rain, whispering to no one, "You don't get to break me twice." Then I turned and walked away. But fate wasn't done yet, because 2 days later, the hospital called me directly. "Ms. Cole, he's asking for you, says it's urgent." And that was the beginning of the final act. The hallway outside his hospital room felt colder than it should have. White walls, white floors, everything too clean, too silent. Nurses moved around me like ghosts, their voices hushed, as if even sound was afraid to intrude. When I finally walked in, he was awake, barely. A thin line of light came through the blinds and cut across his face. Pale, unshaven, eyes sunken in a way that made him look years older. "Clara," he said, his voice almost breaking. It was strange hearing my name sound fragile coming from him. "I wasn't sure you'd come." I stood at the edge of his bed. "You asked for me." He gave a weak laugh. "You always were direct." Then silence. The machines beeped steadily beside him, filling in the pauses where words failed. He gestured toward the chair. "Sit, please." I hesitated, then sat. Not out of comfort, but curiosity. There was a heaviness in the air, the kind that precedes confessions no one can take back. "I know what you think of me," he began. "Most of it's true. I lied. I twisted things. I made you doubt yourself because it was easier than admitting I'd ruined my own life." I didn't speak. He looked away. "You were right about the form, the acknowledgement papers. I destroyed them." My chest tightened. "Why?" His fingers gripped the sheet. "Because if Lily was legally yours, I couldn't control you. If I could make you believe you needed me, I thought you'd stay." The words hit me like slow poison. He continued, voice trembling now. I was so sure I could fix it later, that I could just forge another version, clean it up, and no one would notice. I didn't think it would go this far. I swallowed hard. "You tried to erase me from my own daughter's life." He nodded once, eyes wet. "I know. And I don't expect forgiveness, but there's something else you need to know." He took a shaky breath, reaching toward the nightstand. His hands trembled as he pulled open the drawer and handed me an envelope. Inside was a single page, an insurance policy, recently changed. "You're listed as the guardian and beneficiary now," he said. "For Lily, and for the settlement." "Settlement?" I asked. He coughed, grimaced. "The accident. It wasn't just bad luck. It was my fault. I was drunk. Again. I hit the median, not another car. I lied at first. They were going to investigate, but I stopped them." I stared at him, anger mixing with pity and something even harder to name. "I'm dying, Clara," he said finally. "Liver failure. The crash just sped it up. The doctors say months, maybe less." The monitor beeped steadily, one sound that still felt alive. He looked at me, eyes hollow. "I wanted to see you because I need you to tell Lily that her father wasn't a monster, just a man who couldn't stop breaking the things he loved." The room was too quiet. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the drip of the IV. He reached for my hand. I didn't move away. "Do you hate me?" he asked, voice barely a whisper. "No," I said softly. "I stopped hating you a long time ago, but I'll never forget what you did." He nodded. "That's fair." For the first time since I'd known him, Victor looked like a man stripped of his armor. No charm, no deflection, just truth and the wreckage it left. When I left the hospital, the evening air hit me like a rebirth. Cold, clean, real. The city lights blurred through my tears, but it wasn't grief that made them fall. It was relief. Because after years of manipulation, silence, and fear, the truth had finally stopped running. A week later, a call came from the hospital. He was gone. Peacefully, they said. The nurse mentioned that he'd left a note. I didn't want to read it at first, but when I did, it wasn't what I expected. "Clara, I wanted to control everything because I was terrified of disappearing. Now I know. Control is just another kind of fear. I hope you and Lily remember the parts of me that weren't lies. Keep her laughter close. It's the one thing I didn't ruin. V." That night I tucked Lily into bed. She asked, "Is Daddy still sick?" I paused. "No, sweetheart. He's resting now. Somewhere he can't hurt anymore." She smiled softly. "Then he's okay." "Yes," I whispered. "He's okay." When the house was quiet again, I stood by the window and looked at the night sky. The stars were faint, distant, imperfect, but they were still there, and so was I. It rained the morning we buried Victor. Not the soft, cinematic kind of rain that looks poetic through a car window. No. This was cold, relentless rain that soaked through my coat, the kind that made the ground slippery and the air heavy. There weren't many people there. His mother, gray-faced and trembling. His lawyer, silent, efficient, detached. And me, holding Lily's tiny hand as she clutched a paper flower she'd made that morning. "Can I put it with Daddy?" she whispered. I nodded. "Yes, sweetheart." She stepped forward, placed the flower on the coffin, and whispered something I couldn't hear. When the ceremony ended, everyone drifted away quietly, but I stayed, because walking away felt too easy, too soon. Later that week, I sat across from Victor's lawyer in a quiet office lined with books I didn't recognize. He pushed a file toward me. "There's one last matter, Ms. Bennett. Victor left a secondary letter, for you only. He said it should be opened after the funeral." My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. "Clara, if you're reading this, then it's over. You won, though I don't think you ever saw it that way. I left you everything I could. The policy, the apartment, Lily's trust fund. But there's something else you should know. The forgery, the lies. They weren't just about control. They were about my father. He did the same thing to my mother, erased her legally, cut her out of my life, and called it protection. I swore I'd never become him. But monsters don't just die when you hate them. Sometimes they hide inside you until you start moving exactly like they did. I see that now. I just hope you never let Lily see that part of me. Let her remember laughter, bedtime stories, the few moments when I got it right. I don't deserve peace, Clara, but I wanted you to have it. Victor." I sat there for a long time, staring at the words. All those years, I thought Victor's cruelty was born from pride. But it was fear. Fear of being erased. fear of turning into the man he hated, and in trying to protect himself, he became that man anyway. 3 months passed. Life began to move again, though slower, like a record starting after a long pause. Lily was thriving. New school, new friends, laughter that filled the house in ways it never used to. Sometimes she'd mention her father, but it wasn't heavy anymore, just memories, like fragments of a dream that no longer hurt to recall. I'd started working again, part-time, from home. Evenings were ours, baking cookies, painting, watching her fall asleep surrounded by a fortress of stuffed animals. But peace doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in, quietly, through small, ordinary moments. One night, while organizing old documents, I found the original acknowledgement of maternity form, the one Victor had hidden all those years ago. The ink had faded, but my signature was still there, next to his. It hit me then, all that pain, all that legal war, all those sleepless nights, because of one missing form. A single piece of paper that could have saved us from years of heartbreak. I placed it in a new folder labeled Lily, for later. Because one day she'll ask questions. And when she does, I'll tell her the truth, not to tarnish his memory, but to show her that love isn't about control or winning. It's about letting go. A few days later, I got a letter from Victor's mother. Inside was a photo. Victor holding Lily as a baby, both smiling, sunlight spilling across their faces. On the back, she'd written, "He wasn't all bad. I hope you remember that too." For the first time in a long while, I smiled. Because she was right. He wasn't all bad. He was broken. And so was I for loving him as long as I did. But broken doesn't mean beyond repair. That evening, as Lily and I watched the sunset from our balcony, she said quietly, "Mommy, do you think Daddy can see us?" I looked at the streaks of gold fading into purple and whispered, "Yes, baby. I think he's finally watching the right way this time." She smiled, leaned against me, and fell asleep before the stars appeared. I stayed there long after she'd gone to bed, breathing in the quiet. No courtrooms, no lawyers, no accusations, just stillness. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the next crisis. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about excusing what he did. Maybe it was about refusing to carry it any longer.